Good evening, and thank you so much for coming out tonight. It is way too nice outside, so I do appreciate your sacrifice. My name is Cathy Nelson. I'm retired from the library here some 12 years ago, I guess. And Sallie Calliandri is our town historian. And so together we've been doing some research about many different topics. And tonight we'll be talking about the Revolutionary War, and I'm going to say this wrong, Berlin's part in it. Yes, I know, I mispronounced the
Berlin.
name.
I yell at her all the time. It doesn't do any good. Oh, well. Let's see. Some useful resources that are actually here in the history room. And we also have them, some of them at the Berlin Historical Society Museum on Peck Street, the old library. And that Connecticut Men in the Revolution doesn't talk at all about women, but of course not. Yeah. The Hale Collection of Cemetery Records. This was created in the 1930s during the Depression, and they sent people around to all of the cemeteries to write down all the names, some cases epitaphs and everything. Catherine North's History of Berlin, Connecticut is another source. She talks a lot about, she was born in 1840 and she grew up with people still having some memories of the revolution. And I think there were still some
Yeah, there were a couple.
there were a couple of men that were still there. Cathy's done a lot of research. I'll let you get into that.
All right. And the DAR, Daughters of American Revolution, has an online website with a lot of data. The Sons of American Revolution also has some information. And then dear old ancestry.com for genealogy information. And at the library here in the local history room, we have a little book with no title to it. I call it The Town Soldiers and the Revolution. It was, I think, written by a Sons of American Revolution member around 1900 or so. And what he was doing was trying to identify all the men and get gravestones for them in the various cemeteries. So in a minute, I think at some point I show an illustration of what some of those gravestones look like. And so you'll be able to see that. Oops. Yes.
One of the things that makes research into the American Revolution in Berlin interesting is that Berlin did not exist until 1785. And of course, we started off, in 1775. So you have to hunt through Farmington and Middletown and Wethersfield and even a little bit of Wallingford. What we have, the eastern boundary was near, the eastern boundary of Farmington was around Lower Lane. And I'm not quite sure exactly how it went. But it ended up being about a half a mile east of Christian Lane. As you go further north. Middletown, one of the interesting things is the boundary extended to School Street, and it actually went straight through the Worthington Meeting House. So the northern part was in Wethersfield and the southern part was in Middletown. So why I don't know, but that's the way it was. Wethersfield was the whole area around Home Depot was in Wethersfield, and Wallingford, the southern end of Berlin, like Park Drive South, and even some of Tollgate Road was in Wallingford. So, and there were, yeah.
Oops.
There were no battles in Berlin. And I'm going to let you.
Yep.
Yep.
This is where I have fun. there were about 140, I think it's 147 men who served in the war that have some connection to the town. 13 men we've identified who died as a result of the war. And 118 men have gravestones in the town cemeteries. The photo is of the Kensington Congregational Church. The church, this meeting house was erected in 1774. And this photo is from the 1880s. And you can see the horse barn to the left where people brought their horses and stabled them while church services were going on. And it looks very different from what we see today.
Actually looked a lot like that.
Yeah. And then there were some of our town residents who were prisoners of war. There were some, at least one that we know of, who was a Black person. And women were an integral part of the war, but a lot of what they contributed doesn't get a monument to it. It's the hidden invisible stuff that keeps everything running. And this photo is of the Worthington Meeting House on Worthington Ridge. That was erected in 1775, just a couple months actually after the Kensington one. So 1774, tensions between England and the colonists were increasing. In 1774, the colonies sent representatives to the First Continental Congress, which began coordinating Patriot resistance through underground networks of committees and Minutemen. In August, King George III proclaimed Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion, and the British Army attempted to disarm the colonists. I should mention at this point, of course, that we all watched the American Revolution by Ken Burns this past year. And so we don't talk about the war in detail, but we try to highlight where our men were at certain points. So that's kind of the emphasis that we do. In September of 1774, Paul Revere apparently rode through town with a letter from Samuel Adams to encourage the Continental Congress to support Boston's defense. And there was a reenactment for this back in 1974 with Mayor Art Powers at the time. And the only reason we know that Paul Revere was in town was because of the reenactment. We hadn't heard about it before that.
That's the old town hall.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
April 19th, the call for the relief of Boston and the Lexington alarm. I love the original phrasing for these things. The drawing is actually from 1775. And 11 men from town responded. And these are the men and a couple of people who were out of town but moved to town eventually. So those are the men who served. And this is Sally's research.
Yeah. Okay, getting back to the alarm. The men, the Beckley family basically lived in around the area of Home Depot, which was Wethersfield. And I think James Francis was in that area also. I know William Kelsey was. And some of the Norths were in that area, and also they also were in the Middletown area. Timothy Percival was an uncle of James Gates Percival, that the school is named after. And he was from East Haddam, but he eventually moved to Berlin. And how did they get to Lexington? This was something that, I kind of, well, they didn't drive, and, nowadays, a couple hours to Boston, that's nothing. But It's about 90 miles from Berlin to Concord, Massachusetts, and most of them they would have walked. If they had horses, they probably would have left them home because most families only had one horse if they had one. And at the rate of about 3.1 miles per hour, it would have taken about 42 hours. Some of them may have already been in the Boston area. I'm not sure. I haven't done that much research on that. I'm not quite sure which path they would have followed, but they probably would have gone up to Hartford and at some point crossed the river, obviously by ferry. And then they would have followed the old Connecticut path into Massachusetts.
W4.
Basically,
Yeah.
yeah, some, in that area. Now, there was a call for troops. Go ahead.
Yep. The first call for troops in Connecticut, Governor Trumbull called a special session of the General Assembly. And they passed an act to assemble, equipped, etc., a number of individuals of this colony for the special defense and safety thereof. And so that's the beginning of 6 regiments with 6,000 men in each, or total. And a couple months later, they added 2 more regiments. Whoops, I need to catch up. Whoops, I need to go back. There we go. And these are some of the names and some of the locations that they went to in 1775. And you can see that they're basically all over New England, Long Island, Boston, Ticonderoga and Crown Point, New York, Long Island, etc. And as I said, in July, there were a couple of more regiments that were added. Now, how many of you have heard of the lead mine in town? Oh, okay. Well, in 1775, the General Assembly tasked Matthew Hart and General Selah Hart, who were cousins, to provide stores of lead as they shall deem necessary, with use of the colony, and to raise ore in said mine. The mine is located on the west side of Glen Street, along the river there. We don't know how much lead was generated from this mine. Middletown is better known for having had a lead mine, and but as we say, everything was used in the war effort. So whatever amount they got, that they used it for the bullets and so on. This property is private property, so we had a friend several years ago take these photos for us. Now, George Washington was appointed commander of the Continental Army and assumed command in early July. He may have traveled through Berlin on his way to Boston. The Hartford Current documents is passing through Hartford. He stayed in Wethersfield, but he probably came through town here on the Hartford New Haven path. Catherine North in her history tells us that there was great excitement about the time of the Battle of Bunker Hill because General Washington and his aide Charles Lee and his staff were put up at the Beckley House overnight. The tavern at that time was at 979. Oops, yeah, I did change. Wethersfield Road. It was torn down in the late 1800s. And it is now pretty much the location of Stonebridge. Stonebridge?
Yeah.
B. Okay. Condos there on Wethersfield Road.
Apartments.
It's near. Try that again. Stonebridge Apartments. Cathy North tells another great story. I love this one. Apparently, according to Catherine North, George Washington traveled with a supply of elm tree switches. And the story is that he stuck one of these switches into the ground and outgrew this giant elm tree that was still growing in the early 1900s. It's since disappeared, of course. And so it's great to think about George Washington as sort of a Johnny Appleseed, spreading elm trees wherever he went. Of course, I'm not sure there's that much truth to this story, but it's a great one anyway. Colonel Benedict Arnold at the beginning of the war was a big aide to General Washington, a brilliant general. Unfortunately, when he went up to Quebec, the idea was that they would fight the British in Quebec, and the residents would join the colonial effort to repulse England. That did not happen. It was a devastating loss, and we know at least 3 local men were prisoners of war as a result of that. The siege of Boston was a huge event for our town. From fall 1775 to May 1776. 7 of the 13 men that died from town here died in the siege of Boston. And it wasn't, unfortunately, from battle wounds. It was mostly from smallpox, diphtheria, typhoid fever, malaria, all that fun stuff. 7 of the 13 men in town here died during that effort. And you'll see in the next several slides some of the names of the soldiers that were part of this effort. At the same time, there was a committee formed in town to provide provisions for Boston, and 2 Beckleys were part of this, Benjamin Beckley and Elias Beckley. And we theorized that because the family was in the tavern business, they knew about, supplying people with tasty food. There were additional men who served in the state infantry, sorry. And in New York in 1776, the British leave Boston. That was a big event there where you have the group of ships go off to Nova Scotia, and anyone who was a loyalist, tried to get onto those ships to flee Boston. That allowed General Washington to take some of the troops that were around Boston area and move them to New York. And in the fall of 1776, we have several battles that happened around New York City. The Battle of Long Island, the Battle of White Plains. These were the combined couple of months there, the largest land battle of the war, with over 40,000 men participating. We know 4 men who were captured as a result of this. And do you want to tell the story of Selah Hart?
Oh, sure. Okay. Selah Hart at this time was, I believe, he became a colonel when when his superior was killed in one of these battles. I'm not sure when. He was taken prisoner, and the story was that they were part of a division that was kind of holding down the fort while Washington escaped. So whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. But Selah was taken prisoner, and He was prisoner for over a year, and his wife didn't know if he was alive or dead.
Hold on,
Huh?
let me catch up.
Okay.
As far as where they were imprisoned, many of them were in prison ships in Long Island Sound. And this is an illustration of what one of those prison ships looks like. But there's also some thought that they might have been at the sugar house.
That's one possibility. Now, Selah probably had a better shot at surviving because he was an officer. So they generally treated the officers better than the general enlisted men.
Okay, now you can do Selah.
Okay, where am I here? Okay. Now Selah Hart was born in a house on what's now 172 Four Rod Road. During this research, we found out that the original house that he was born in burned in the 1930s, and it was rebuilt on the same site using the same foundation. They did that a lot. And then he was over 6 feet tall, which was unusual for men at that time. He started out as a captain, and he was raised to colonel, and then eventually he became a brigadier general. He was after the war, he built his house at 200 Four Rod Road, and if you haven't seen that house, go drive by. It's beautifully restored. They did a nice job with that. And actually, although he did not have any children, biological children that survived to adulthood, he adopted his late brother's children, and those descendants lived in the house until the 1970s. I think it was 1974 when the last one passed away. And I actually know nieces and nephews of the family that, are still around, not in town, and Selah and his wife are buried in Ledge Cemetery. He was active in the Kensington Congregational Church and in Berlin politics in general. When Berlin became a town, he was one of the ones that was very supportive of that. You want me to keep going?
Yep.
Okay.
You get Thomas Galvin.
Okay, and he was the son of Amos Galpin and Anna Patterson. Patterson. Next week we're doing a program on Berlin tin, and of course the Pattersons were famous for their tin. Anna was a sister of that. Now he lived in Northington Parish, probably around the meeting house, and he's buried in Bridge Cemetery, which is right across from the Citgo station on Mill Street.
Ledge.
Huh?
Ledge.
It's right next to the river. It's off of Farmington Avenue.
No. Ledge.
No, Ledge?
Cashman Place off of Four Rod Road.
Right. It's one of
Camel's Back Bridge.
Okay.
Turn right, turn right.
It's not that small. It's not that small. If you're going over Camel's Back, if you turn right.
Immediately right.
Yeah, and then your first right is Cashman Place. You go in there, and it's right there. Yeah, that cemetery was established around 1774, 1775. That general time period. It's no longer an active cemetery, but
Neither is Bridge.
no, Bridge is not either. So, go ahead.
This cemetery stone is an example of what the Sons of American Revolution built. You can see they all start with Revolutionary War, the soldier's name, and oftentimes the regiment and company that they were part of. And so you'll see this kind of standard look to those stones throughout town. That's all.
Brown.
No, there's gray. Because this was 1900 or so they were doing them. So the brownstones would have been 17 and 1800s.
Right. And let's talk, oh, should we talk about the, Samuel Lee was a,
Okay.
yeah. Samuel Lee was a prisoner. And one of the stories that Catherine North tells is that at one point in his prisonership, he caught a rat. And it was the sweetest meat he'd ever eaten. Gross. Especially now when we're talking about the hantavirus. Yeah. Okay.
And the rat is what makes me think that some of the men were on the warships or the ships in Long Island, because
Right.
somehow I associate rats and ships together.
Okay. Let's talk about one of my favorite people, Levi North. Some of you
Yes.
may have heard this story before. He enlisted when he was 16. And he was a blacksmith by trade. He was an older brother of Simeon North, the pistol maker that you may have heard of. And he was captured and he served some time on the prison ship. They put him to work, fixing things. And I'm not sure how long he was a prisoner, but anyway, they when the war was over, they turned him loose. He sent them a bill for his services, and they paid it. And he used the money. It was about $1,200 to build this house, which is still standing on Main Street in East Berlin. It could use a little work, but it's still there. He also, they served rice like every day. And once he became free, he never ate rice again. So, I'll let you.
All right. So still in 1776 here, Washington lost New York City, as you know. And so several men retreated with him to New Jersey. A couple are identified as marching with Washington or retreating with Washington, specifically. But all these men crossed the river and went on to continue the war effort. And there were a couple of men that remained in New York, doing what they could. In 1777, there was a need for permanent troops. Originally, a lot of time was 3-month enlistments, and it didn't take Washington long to figure out that he needed men to commit and to train if they were going to beat the British Army. So he wanted 3-year enlistments or the duration of the war. The same thing happened with the Civil War, but this is something that Washington also saw the need for. And then in April of 1777, the British attacked Danbury. And many of our men responded to that alarm. Now, Danbury was a supply depot for Washington's army. Colonel Jedediah Huntington had 100 men to help protect these stores. General William Tryon of the British Army led 1,850 men to raid in the attack. Fortunately, the Patriots saw that they were coming and sent messengers to spread the alarm. And it's interesting, the British didn't come to take the supplies, they came to destroy them. And so they destroyed 4,000 barrels of beef and pork, 1,000 barrels of flour, 89 barrels of rice, 30 pipes of wine, 50 things of molasses, 20 casks of coffee, large amount of hospital bedding, engineering carpenter tools, a printing press, 5,000 pairs of shoes and stockings. Now, I've never been in the Army, but I know as a hiker in my earlier days, your shoes and your socks are very important. And it's important for the Army because the Army men are on their feet in all kinds of weather. And so warm stockings and good shoes are really important. And we have stories of two women in town who, just before their men went off to war, spent the time to prepare new stockings for them so that they could protect their feet. As I said, dry feet for soldiers is a really important part of their success. In the summer of 1777, there were a couple of regiments that remained in Saratoga. And the battles, in my mind, seem to shift to the middle part of the country. You have Brandywine, Germantown, Valley Forge, and these are some of the men that were part of those efforts. Additional troops in 1777, Sherburne's regiments were very active. Sheldon's light dragoons were very active, and many of our men were part of those. The Corps of Invalids, I found out that means that they couldn't do field service, but they could do guard duty. And one of our men is identified as doing that. In 1778, you had the Battle of Monmouth, and they wintered in Reading, Connecticut. And we have the Battle of Rhode Island, and several of our men were there. This is an interesting story, and we don't see it in the town history. We see it in the Guilford history. But Captain David Sage, who lived on Worthington Ridge there, was taken prisoner. He was a privateer, basically, trying to harass the British Navy. The British Navy occupied New York City and Long Island, and so even in the dead of winter, there were British warships making raids on the coastal towns. And so the Patriots fought back with small boats that were quick and fast and shallow, so they could kind of zip in and out. On February 6, 1779, Captain Sage and his men were captured, and they were being sent by ship to New York. On February 21st, it was a snowstorm, and Sage and his fellow prisoners were able to overpower the crew and beach the ship on the rocks in Guilford. Then Sage's men scavenged all the metal they could: anchors, cables, chains, guns, because iron was in short supply for the Army. The two cannon that they rescued remained in Guilford and were even used in the War of 1812. In July 1779, there was an alarm at New Haven, similar to the alarm at Danbury. This time we had 28 men who responded. I swear every person in town went off.
Well, it was literally in their backyard.
Yeah.
And if they had been successful, the British would have come right up the Hartford New Haven path, which is basically Route 15. And, they would have been then in their backyard. There were stories about people burying their valuables in their backyard until it was over. Captain Samuel Hart, who was the father of Emma Hart Willard, told stories about bullets flying over his head, and one man apparently was right next to him was shot and killed, and he was summarily told, "Keep your head down, otherwise you'll be next." So it was quite a busy time. So we'll go back.
Okay. 1780, the Connecticut troops were consolidated from 8 regiments down to 5 regiments, and some of the men that were there. And there were some stationed in Guilford for the defense of the seacoast. And we hear that phrase a lot of times. 1781, you have the siege of Yorktown. And several of or a couple of our men anyway, were there. And in 1781, in June of that year, General Rochambeau from the French camped in Farmington. They had been posted in Newport, Rhode Island, and had stayed there quite a long time, actually. And so they finally left Newport and went to join Washington in New York State. And their path took them through Farmington. It's interesting because the group included 450 officers, 3,800 enlisted men, 1,000 servants, 350 cooks, laundrymen, and so on, 30 wives and children. And they camped at Route 10, which is Main Street in Farmington, and Route 6, which is Scott Swamp Road in Farmington. And remember, we're still part of Farmington at this point, so I'm sure many of our families were providing provisions for this camp. And in 1783, as the war is winding down, we still have some men working with Washington. And finally, the treaty is signed. The Treaty of Paris, war is over, and this is the famous painting of the signing of the treaty. Interesting enough, this just shows the United States representatives. None of the British representatives wanted to be in the portrait.
I wonder why.
Now, there's a couple of other things that were going on during the war that we don't really know a whole lot about. And one of them is the submarine. You know, you've probably heard of David Bushnell. He was the one who really spearheaded the effort to develop an underwater vessel that could be used to deliver an explosive charge and wipe out a British Navy ship. But one of the men who was assisting him was Abraham Wright of town here. In 1776, they experimented with a torpedo boat in the Hudson River. And they also were in the Delaware River and this Long Island Sound. You want to talk about Bradley? Sure.
Bradley Elton was a tailor, and he made soldiers' uniforms for the Light Horse Brigade. At the time of the Revolution, he lived in Middletown, not too far from Atkins Street. So he was right over the line, what we consider the line now. But he later moved to Berlin to Kensington Road, and part of his farm was known as Sunny Border up until recently. So he is buried in Dunham Cemetery, which is off of Norton Road. That's a little tiny cemetery. Now, enlistments.
Oops. Yep.
Enlistments could vary. At the beginning of the war, they were as short as 3 months, and that was for the farmers to be able to be active duty for a while and then go home and plant their crops, or go home and harvest their crops, depending on what was what. And a lot of times there wasn't much going on in the winter. Washington found that just didn't work. So he wanted men that could sign up for as much as 3 years. So what did the women do? Well, they were, if your husband or father or brother or whatever is out fighting, who's home taking care of the farm, milking the cows and collecting the chickens' eggs and all that stuff? But the women. So they had to pick up the slack. And, they even had to sometimes handle the plow. The oxen did a lot of the work, so that was a help. They would care for the wounded. or the disabled in some way. They would cook. They would, you've heard of Molly Pitcher, who fought on the battlefield. You've heard about at least a couple of ladies who knit the socks for the soldiers. So somebody had to do that. I can't read
Oh,
this.
Sybil Ludington?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sybil Ludington is supposed to have been like a Paul Revere with the New Haven alarm. She rode 40 miles to alert the Patriots that the British were coming, literally. And as we've emphasized, provided provisions, raising animals, growing vegetables, caring for the family farm to feed both the family and the military.
Okay. Ruth Cole Hart, we have a wonderful painting. We recently received donations from I think a family member of the portraits of Selah Hart and Ruth Cole Hart. So Ruth Cole was born in Blue Hills, which is basically south of Norton Road. She was born in a house that's no longer there on Chamberlain Highway. But her brother served in the military. I think her father had served in some capacity, not in the American Revolution, but I think in the militia. She had no children, but she raised a couple of her her husband's brother's children. So and in 1837 she got a pension and donated a lot of it to the Kensington Congregational Church, which they used to make renovations. So she's buried in Ledge Cemetery. And she obviously managed the farm the whole time that they were that her husband was away fighting. Another interesting woman is Prudence Punderson Rossiter. She was born in Groton, Connecticut, and her father was a Tory. She was engaged to a patriot, Timothy Rossiter, and they were not able to marry until after the war was over. And for a little while, she lived in Berlin, but we don't know what brought the family here. There was a Rossiter connection somewhere in there, but I don't recall where. But she probably lived somewhere on the ridge. She is noted for her embroidery, and the Connecticut Historical Society has a wonderful collection of her work, and the workmanship is beautiful. If anybody's done needlework in their past life, it's just gorgeous. She unfortunately died at age 26 shortly after her daughter was born. And her husband then moved to Georgia. And this is one of her works.
This is the most famous one.
Yeah.
This is her most famous piece of embroidery, and it's not very large, actually. It's called The First, Second, and Last Scene of Mortality. It depicts in the center a woman. On the left is a coffin with her initials. And on the right is a baby. And what's interesting is there's a Black woman there who we think is her slave. And so it's unusual to see an art depiction of a slave. Hepzibah Wilcox Beckley. During the war, a group of starving soldiers stopped at the Beckley Tavern. And so she had a cow butchered to feed them. And there's a story that George Washington had stayed overnight on his way to Boston, but that story has not been verified. She was known, according to Catherine North, for her kindness of heart and goodness. Her son Silas Beckley, when the soldiers stopped in, ran himself so ragged trying to get water to the horses and provide provisions for the men that for the rest of his life he was considered an invalid. In fact, it says it on his gravestone. All right, loyalists and Tories. Not everyone was a patriot. However, in all the research we've done, that's mine, I guess. Yep. Oh, wait a minute, that's the next page. Hold on. Yep. Okay, not everyone was a patriot. In all of our research, we do not see where anyone moved out of town because of their loyalist beliefs. And so we think that in the town proper here, there doesn't seem to be any loyalists. However,
Small.
yeah, I'll get to
Yeah,
Reverend Smalley. Episcopalians and Anglican churches were more apt to have ministers who were loyalists, whereas the Congregationalists were more apt to be patriots. And the churches in town here were all congregational at that time. As you probably know, most of the loyalists moved to either Long Island or Nova Scotia, and we don't know of any local residents moving. Now, the town at the time was a section of Farmington, and there were 3 church societies in town here. There was the Kensington Congregational Church, which had just opened their meeting house in 1774. There was the Worthington Meeting House on the Worthington Ridge, and then there was the New Britain Society. And as I said, all 3 of these were congregational. The Kensington and Worthington really didn't have minister until 1779 and 1780. So during the first years of the Revolution, they didn't have a minister. Now, Reverend Smalley is an interesting person. He was the minister at New Britain. He came in 1758. And initially, he didn't seem to be very supportive of the war effort. He was more inclined to side with the royalty and authoritative kinds of views. One Sunday morning, 2 British vessels appeared off of New London, and an express was sent to alarm the people of the colony. It arrived in New Britain on Sunday, just before the close of the afternoon services. As soon as the blessing was pronounced, Captain Gad Stanley gave notice to his company to appear on the parade grounds the next morning. This would have been Smalley Park. The next, Mr. Smalley was at the door, and he made the following remark: "What, will you fight your king?" Well, as you can imagine, some people were offended by this and threatened violence to Reverend Smalley. But Colonel Isaac Lee came and spoke so that the tempest was hushed without any action. And during the war, Reverend Smalley's views were moderated, and he did become a patriot as well. As I said, we were part of Farmington, and there were some people identified as loyalists. Matthias Lemming is a well-known loyalist. He was excommunicated in a town vote. His lands were confiscated. And when he died, he's noted because his gravestone reads, "In memory of Mr. Matthias Lemming, who has got beyond the reach of persecution. The life of man is vanity." His stone is facing west, the opposite direction of everyone else in the cemetery. He asked his brother to bury him with his feet to the west, so that when the last trumpet sounded, he should rise and shine, facing opposite from his persecutors. In March 1776, Farmington voted that two people, Lieutenant Ebenezer Orvis and Hannah Andrus, be advertised as enemies to their country. Why, you ask? They persisted in their use of the prohibited and detested tea. If any of you are a tea addict, you probably have sympathy for them. But again, this is how the women could support the war effort, was to not drink tea. And this was a very common way of supporting the war. In May 1777, Farmington arrested 17 men identified as inimical to America and jailed them in Hartford. It's interesting, they didn't send them directly to Newport in prison in Simsbury. While waiting in jail, most of the men recanted and swore a loyalty oath. And so they were released and continued to live out their lives. Stephen Graves was another Tory. And at one point he hid out in Burlington in what is called the Tory Caves to avoid the Patriots. And his wife would bring him food each evening. Now, the section of town of Burlington, Bristol, that was a kind of a loyalist haven. There was a minister in Bristol that kind of was a leader to the loyalist group. And so there was this small cluster of loyalists there. But again, in town here, it seems that we were all patriots or very quiet. Yes, there were slaves in town here. In Connecticut, most prominent families, that is the ministers, the leaders, the military men, had slaves. And some of this was based from the early 1700s. Reverend Cotton Mather advocated Christianizing Black slaves on religious grounds and as tending to make them more patient and faithful servants. And that was a prevailing attitude. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's wrong, but that was the prevailing kind of thought at the time. Now, this is my personal belief, editorial comment. I think when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and used the phrase, all men are created equal, that kind of changed some of the thinking around slavery. Now, we learned from Ken Burns' documentary about how complex the slavery issue was. Several thousand slaves won their freedom by serving on both sides of the war. The English promised independence if you would fight the Patriots. And by 1777, General Washington realized he needed men, so free and Black slaves were allowed to join the army. Some were doing it in exchange for freedom at the end. Pharaoh Hart was an enslaved man, and Sallie thinks he's probably the same person listed in an inventory of Samuel Bronson. Was he by name Pharaoh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and his will is named as Pharaoh. And at some point, he probably was bought by Selah Hart. Selah also owned a boy named Jack, who was freed when he became 21. And the word that we get is that Jack was treated better than most colonial boys at the time. He was educated, he was clothed and well treated. Well treated in a slave? I don't know how you can say that in the same sentence, but that's the word that we get. Pharaoh, on the other hand, enlisted in the Continental Army with the agreement that half of his pay would be given to Selah Hart. After the war, there was some negotiation going on, and Selah Hart claimed all of his salary, but he did get his freedom, and at some point moved to New Jersey. And in 1818, he did collect a pension as a soldier of the Revolution. After the Revolution, northern states began to pass laws to abolish slavery. In 1848, Connecticut was the last New England state to have formally abolished slavery. Now, George Washington did visit our town several times. Let me flip to my pages. As we've mentioned, he visited the Beckley Tavern a couple of times at least. And I've shared those stories before. Roger Riley had a tavern on Worthington Ridge, and Catherine North tells us that George Washington stopped, patted the heads of his twin sons, who were born in 1786. So this would have been post-revolution. And the famous visit is the visit to Fuller Tavern on Worthington Ridge. This house is still standing. And let me take a minute to tell you about this visit. It happened while George Washington was newly elected president. It was after the war. And he went on a thank you tour to thank the soldiers for their efforts. In Nathaniel Philbrook's book called Travels with George, he details Washington's trip to New England. The trip was for 3 reasons. 1, people at that time thought of themselves as Connecticut men or Virginians, but not as United States people. And so Washington wanted them to think of themselves as Americans, as in we're in it together. Second, Washington wanted to talk with farmers, mill owners, and leaders to look for noteworthy agricultural and building techniques. And third, to thank the soldiers. Now, Philbrook tells us that Washington resorted to a bit of political theater. Before entering a town, he stepped out of his carriage, dressed in his general's uniform. He would mount his gleaming white horse and lead a parade down the town main street to thunderous acclaim. Today, a politician needs to look good on television. Back then, you had to look good on a horse. Washington would start bright and early before dawn. He'd travel about 10 miles before stopping for breakfast. There would be 2 more stops to water and feed the horses, and a final push to tavern for the night. Well, our town was halfway between Hartford and New Haven. And Joyce Myers in her books tells us that word had been sent by courier the evening before to landlord Fuller that His Excellency General Washington would take breakfast with him at precisely 7 o'clock the following morning. The little village was in commotion, and the night and early morning were spent in making preparations for the coming event. An arch was erected beyond the tavern and festooned with flags and appropriate mottos. Under the arch and on one side of the narrow roadway were 2 tables. Upon one stood decanters of old Jamaican rum, Santa Cruz rum, and Holland gin. On the other table stood bottles of old port sherry and Madeira wine, and a pitcher of cold water. It was expected that the general would dismount, take a nip, and while standing under the arch, the fife and drums would play, and General Selah Hart, an orator and old soldier, would deliver the address of welcome to Worthington. 7 o'clock came. 8 o'clock came. 8:30, the weary watchers and waiters were told that Washington had gone by the Middletown Turnpike. And so several drinks of old Jamaican were drunk, especially to sustain the orator and old soldier Selah Hart. The crowd was about to disperse when Washington and his staff were seen approaching the outskirts of the village. General Hart was propped up against the arch upon Washington's arrival. General Hart stood, bowed, and then with his arms folded across his stomach said, "General, I am too full for utterance." Washington didn't say much about this. In his diary, he says, Tuesday, November 10th, left Hartford about 7 o'clock and took the middle road. breakfasted at Worthington in the township of Berlin at the house of one Fuller, and got into New Haven, which is 13 miles more, about a half hour later. So that's Washington's take on it. Oops, there's a really nice picture of Washington on a horse. All right, editorial comment. Today there is no statue or plaque in town to remember the Revolutionary soldiers. We have 118 gravestones in various cemeteries, but no central recognition. And as I said, there are two styles of cemetery stones. The one on the left is a family stone. The one on the right is the Sons of America Revolution with that stylized kind of consistent look. As I said, 13 men died in the war. And most of the first ones here on this slide, it was all at the Siege of Boston. And then others while in service and so on. Want to take over? I'm tired of hearing my voice.
Okay, where are we here?
After the war.
Okay, some of the people that died.
Nope,
Okay.
after the war.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, Berlin was incorporated as a town in 1785. And it included at the time what we know now as New Britain. And New Britain stayed a part of the town until 1850. Many former soldiers were active in town affairs, Selah Hart especially, but many others as well. Some moved to new locations in Ohio. A lot of the soldiers got land as part of their bounty for serving in the war. And Ohio was a favorite place. If you go to Ohio, there's a lot of towns that are named after places in Connecticut. The last soldier.
Oh, yep.
Okay.
Nope.
The last soldier in Berlin was Samuel Bishop. And this is his house on what's now the Berlin Turnpike. And I'm having trouble reading some of this.
Okay. He's buried in Maple Cemetery. The last man recognized by the U.S. government was Daniel Baldwin, who died in 1869 after the Civil War. He was 109 years old. Now, there's a book written called The Last Men of the Revolution. And it's interesting, it was written by Reverend Hilliard, who at that time served at the Kensington Congregational Church. He is known for his patriotic zeal during the Civil War. He inspired the women of the church to sew an enormous flag that still hangs in the church parlor. He led the efforts that created the first Civil War monument in the country that was designed by Nelson Augustus Moore, and that's the Soldiers Monument on Purcell Avenue, the first in the country. And in July 1864, he interviewed 6 men who were among the last living Revolutionary soldiers. And he spent the month traveling from Maine, New York, Ohio, and Connecticut to interview them. These are the only photographs that exist of Revolutionary War soldiers. Of course, they're all old men at this point. But it's interesting that these are the only photos. Now, back in 1976, the town had a very active bicentennial committee. And one of the things they did was they published a book called The American Revolution Bicentennial. And in it, they have lots of articles about historical topics, ranging from who were the prominent families in town to what were the clothing, what were roads like, what games did they play, and so on. Sallie and I filed a directory of the 147 men who served in the war. We have print copies at the library and the Historical Society. It's also available online. So if you're interested in a particular patriot, you can look them up and read about it on the library website. It's under local history resources. And so it is available for you. And today we have the 250th committee. Their first big effort is the Yankee Peddler Day at the end of the month. And what's that?
It's May 30th from 10 to 4, and it'll be over at the Veterans
Memorial Park.
Veterans Memorial Park. So
Come out.
come on out and hopefully. And we have, if you haven't had a chance yet, the Historical Society is open most Saturdays from 1 to 4. And we have a wonderful display for the 250th. We focus a lot on Selah and Ruth Hart because they were such an important part. But it's really neat to see. So, okay, what do we have here?
And next, as Sallie indicated, next week at the Senior Center, we're doing a program about the tin industry and the start of Yankee Peddlers and wooden nutmegs and everything you didn't know about the local first industry in town. And in June, again at the Senior Center, we're doing a program on the South Burying Ground or Blue Hills Cemetery. A lot of times cemeteries in town have multiple names. And then we'll be back here at the library in September to be announced. Any questions? Things you think we omitted?
When did Moore become a famous painter? Augustus Moore.
Oh, Nelson Augustus Moore? Probably in the 1870s. 1860s, he was mostly a photographer and did a lot of Civil War soldiers actually. I think it's 1870s when he went to Lake George and really developed his painting, although he trained with Milo Hotchkiss and talks about basically just after high school, I think, drawing and trying to draw hands was something that was very difficult for Milo Hotchkiss. And then he went to New York and studied with a artist in New York City, I think. But I think it's really in the 1870s and 80s that he becomes really well known. But he always kept his Kensington roots throughout his career. He was a big supporter of town and a big inspiration and participant in the forming of the Peck Memorial Library.
I just wanted to say that the trust has not wrecked.
Yes, there's a monograph about Nelson Augustus Moore that the Land Trust published. We have copies both at the Historical Society and the local history room because it's really well written.
It was written by John Lockery. Now
John, what's his last name?
Lockery.
Lockery.
Yeah.
Thank you. He's fantastic writer.
Do you have any paintings?
At the museum, yes, they do have a couple of paintings.
Right, if you.
There are copies available from the Land Trust.
No.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. If someone wants to get in touch with Land Trust, they have additional copies of that monograph. Anything else? Yeah.
That picture that you had of the Congregational Church in Britain, where would that be? Does that still exist? It's not.
It's the no, it's the First Church of Christ Congregational.
Would have that been the one on Main Street?
Main Street?
No, that would have. I think that was it was brick.
I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was on. Okay, how many of you remember Old Time New Britain Center? Okay, you remember where Rollers was?
Yes.
It was just to the left of that. It was right on the corner of Church Street and Main Street. And it was torn down. No, it was torn down in, I think the late 1950s when they moved to, Farmington or, Corbin Avenue. They built the modern church. So that was that, so. Any other questions? Come on, guys.
I have one question.
Sure.
I don't know if I ever asked you. But when I was in fourth grade, I went to the meeting house,
Okay,
school,
yeah, cool.
and near the meeting house, off a ways, there was a woman that had a parrot. And to this day, I don't know who she was, and I'd like to find out who she was.
That I don't know, Lorraine might know. She knows everything about the ridge, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked her. She
Yeah,
didn't
he
know.
doesn't know. Yeah. There are, just getting back to Nelson Augustus Moore. Many of his paintings are scenes of Kensington. And you can almost pick them out that, like, it's like, this has got to be High Road. You know,
Turkey Hill, Turkey.
Turkey Hill.
Yeah.
There, he painted a lot of scenes from the Stone House. And one of the benefactors, I think, of the Moore Trust is are the Stitzers. And they live on Moorland Hill. And they have a ton of his original paintings. They are just spectacular.
There, I saw it after, like you would not believe, let me tell you. His
Mhm.
paint.
They are
And they're not
wonderful.
cheap, you know.
No. Well, he was part of the Hudson River School, which was very popular. Thomas Cole, who are some other ones I can't think. But
Not my expertise.
you know, the mid 19th century, it was a very popular, very realistic. I know there's one painting that I saw of, you know, when you're looking at the Blue Hills, if you're coming down Berlin Turnpike and you see that little notch that's in the mountain. There's a couple of his paintings that really just you see that, and it's Kensington 150 years ago, and they're just wonderful. A lot of orchard scenes. It's so the Turkey Hill painting is, you look at Turkey Hill now and it's basically all woods and houses, and it was bare fields with maybe a couple of trees. It's just so different from what we see nowadays. Turkey Hill is okay.
Elwood, is it?
Elwood, Crater Lane, that area, Elwood Road, Crater Lane.
We still have turkeys that come.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're a recent reoccurrence. Because I mean, I grew up in town. I never remember seeing a turkey when I was a kid. But they're all over the place now, which I think is awesome. Same thing with deer. It was a big thing when you saw a deer back in the 50s. Now they're in everybody's garden. So.
And bears.
And bears. I can do without the bears.
All right, anything else? You guys are wonderful, thank you. There are permits that are made this morning and lemonade, help yourself, I don't want to bring them home. And thank you so much for coming tonight, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Carol, and I understand. I just want to thank you so much for doing this program. It was so wonderful. Thank you so
Good,
much.
I'm glad you
Okay.
enjoyed it. Good, thank you.
I'll be a minute.
Hey.
I need my kid, no, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
At least now we're not sound.
In a book, short and his name is Venture Smith. He's a black
Yes,
guy.
oh, yeah.
Yes,
He's
had a-
list somewhere.
yeah.
Wasn't-
Well, no, he was in
He
Indiana.
wasn't Connecticut.
No, no, we're really micro focused. Oh, in town.
That's right, yeah.
I'll refer to other
I got
things,
so many
but,
questions about that time. 'Cause I'm reading about Shays
yeah,
revolution
Yeah.
now.
right,
And of course, their big deal right then is
Right.
taxes.
yeah.
Well, how
Yeah.
much did they have to pay before the revolution? Never hear about what they did.
Well, you
I
mean
you
under
hear
the
about teeth. I
Stamp
don't think
Act
that
and-
really-
Oh,
It was
yeah.
more dignant. I mean,
yeah.
With
I
printing,
mean, how much would
the
you
paper
waste
tax.
tea? Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not
See,
only
it's a
that,
big thing.
yeah, but not only that, but they had the Stamp Act was another thing,
Right,
you
but
know.
land and property tax is what they tried to come up with for Shays revolution.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, a little after. the
right,
revolution.
yeah.
Yes,
And Washington was pretty upset,
Oh, yeah,
you know, we gotta have a constitution here,
right, right.
which meant an army,
Thank
Yeah.
you.
which means they're oppressing the people again.
yes.
I say Berlin too, because I didn't grow up.
That's okay. I take my lumps. I've had a couple of town historians that rap my knuckles all the time.
But
And,
you're right.
This was excellent.
Venture.
and I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, yeah, he was East Haddam, I believe. Yeah,
Yeah, it's how, it's further.
yeah,
Along
yeah,
the-
yeah.
I was trying to remember.
Yeah, there's, and I mean, we did, there's just, it's so hard to research people of color,
Yes,
because they were invisible.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just the reality, and women were invisible.
right.
So, you know, trying to uncover what they actually did it's a challenge, you know, it's something, you know, it's been 250 years, so it's even harder.
Yeah.
But you know, when you can get access to things like diaries, you'll
Yeah,
hear
right.
stories.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for people like Ken Burns and some of the.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Research.
Yes,
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
it is. Absolutely.
And some of the town histories, it's like, Catherine North's history is sometimes hard to wade through. Because she's talking about houses like, oh, this is Joe Smith's house. And so lived there 200 years ago, you know, and you're trying to figure. "What's this?"
And what
Yeah.
house is it?
She
Does it
died in
exist?
1914, so
Yeah.
you're trying to figure this stuff out.
Ah.
So it's kind of hard. Also, it's a challenge.
The more I read, the more questions I have.
Oh, absolutely. That's the way it is.
Started.
Well, no, we
You know,
don't.
I mean, you mentioned pension up there.
Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
Continentals, I mean, you know,
Yeah,
what was it?
Yeah.
It wasn't worth much, I guess, right?
Well, when you can eat, I don't know how much Ruth Hart got for seeing
I just read that she got the second largest
pension.
pension.
Because there wasn't a common currency. You know what I mean? Like we think of now, we think of
Yeah.
the dollar, everybody knows the dollar.
Yeah.
But
But-
back for a long time, even the central
Yeah,
bank.
but 1835, we did have banks and so on.
Yeah, we had banks, but
Yeah.
what I understand, there wasn't one common currency. Banks would deal in some kind of certificate,
Well,
you know, and.
whatever, it was
good-
enough that
it would
she
be
was
good-
very generous in her life.
Be good locally, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't. But I'd love to understand more because I know I don't.
Yeah.
I know that.
It's just, you know, but it's helpful to know what you don't know.
Yeah. It's starting.
Because that can help you to focus on what you need to research. You can't research everything. But just,
And
okay,
so much is not documented.
yeah, but just knowing, okay, this is what I want to look for. And then hopefully knowing where to look. You know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, land records can give you an idea about money, how much things were worth, you know. you know, that's one source, and they have tax records, how much a property was worth,
Yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
yeah, some got confiscated to pay taxes.
Mhm.
You know, and here you just fought in the war.
Okay.
Well, this is during the war, but yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah, okay, yeah.
There's so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
Every
Oh, yeah.
little bit, every
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit helps, so. And one thing I found very interesting was, the fact that,
Yeah.
George Washington was one of the first people to advocate for a smallpox vaccine.
Oh, yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Yeah, we did, yeah, and, you know, the Jenner vaccine that we know of and that we all got as kids was, that didn't come out until I think the 1790s or something like that, but there
Right,
was
yeah.
other ways of getting inoculated against it.
Started reading John McCulloch's book on the building of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
And the first, not the road when you think of finishing the bridge, but his father started it. And he got a cut.
Yeah.
What we now know as rabies, he lasted like, not rabies. Tetanus.
Yes.
He lasted like 3 weeks in total horror.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
And now we just have a vaccine for it.
right, yeah,
Yeah, you get
Yeah,
your shot.
it's nothing.
I mean, but this was more typical
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
than it is now.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
of course, you don't want to get vaccinated.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm a Hubbard, so those are my,
We know
those
that.
Hubbards are cousins.
Oh,
And
neat.
and they originated in Middletown.
Yes.
Middletown.
I've
So
got
now-
Hubbard from Middletown in my ancestry.
Yeah, really?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I had-
That's been dissimilar.
yeah.
Distantly, but yeah.
Thank you, Sally, for taking.
No, I didn't bother, but
Vanderbilt.
being
It was going crazy.
between the
trying to
age
see
of
what-
15 and 35 in my genealogy were patriots.
Yeah.
I mean, every one of
Yeah,
them.
and I, yeah.
Vanderbilt. The foundation.
But now it makes
Yeah.
sense that.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the foundation.
and East Berlin is a real hub for,
Yeah.
for,
I know, I hated to
I'm
see
a-
that go.
um,
My mother
Many
actually
years ago. there was a
remembered
That had. the,
having a drink of
copies
cider
The
from
government
that
cider.
oh, neat.
And it was,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Yeah.
Hubbards were there.
Oh, yeah.
Right, yeah, well, they didn't take care of it.
This is really interesting.
Good, good, I'm glad.
We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, we'll
Thanks.
see you
Take care.
again. Hopefully we'll see you next week. If you
It could
can.
be, yeah.
I'm gonna try to make that.
I did a show with Nancy at Air pretty soon. You know, to talk about events coming up, you know.
Excuse me?
She's good, I'll tell you, Nancy's
The
very
other
good.
2 riders.
Oh, okay,
All right,
Yeah,
good to see you.
the shortest distance.
yeah. Oh,
Right,
you mean the big one?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the fact that he came from Boston through town here to go to Philadelphia, I thought was really neat.
yeah, there's things that we forgot, so. Yeah. Kathy, have you met my son?
I
David?
think we have,
Yeah,
but yeah, thanks.
so. this
Thanks
is-
for chauffeuring.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was good.
Oh, good.
The farming one, the place was packed.
Yeah.
So,
61 people.
yeah.
This time we had, I think, 23,
Oh,
20
that's-
in person, 3
yeah,
online.
that's cool.
Yeah,
So are we all set?
until tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.